Well, I had the opportunity to interview a lady called Jan Cavelle, and she's an entrepreneur from the UK who has a few decades of running micro and small businesses behind her. And she's very familiar with all the challenges that go with that, and having started one from her kitchen table with her children when the children were quite small, and she was a single mother. But then she went on to build that into a multi-million-dollar turnover business. Now, Jan's put her entrepreneurial experiences together with a passion for writing together a book aimed at helping entrepreneurs. Now, that book is called Scale for Success, but she's coming out with a new book, and the book's called Start for Success. And Jan and I had a really cool conversation about things, and one thing we did talk about was about getting over your fear. And, you know, a lot of people do struggle with fear and not sure about certain things, or don't go and do certain things because of fear getting in the way. What she said was everything you want is on the other side of fear. And the other thing we talked about was businesses or organizations and how they can retain fun and energy as well, because a lot of organizations need to do that. Have fun while they're working, but how do we retain the energy and keep going? And it's not always about work, it's about having fun while we're doing the work, but also having that energy in the organization as well. Jan is a great lady. Now let's sit back and enjoy the interview.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas.
Hey there, listeners. I have a wonderful guest with me today. Her name is Jan Cavelle, and Jan is in the UK, and I'm going to bring her on the show. But first of all, I just want to say to you, take notes as we go through today's episode. Some wonderful things that Jan's going to share with us in relation to Leadership is Changing on this wonderful podcast. Jan, a massive welcome to you.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be with you.
Thank you. Yeah. And so whereabouts are you in the world today? Of course, I said the UK, but whereabouts in the UK?
I am indeed in the UK. I'm right on the somewhat windy coast, south coast, up near France on a clear day.
Oh, wow. Very good. And you can see France on a clear day?
On a very, very clear day, yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's excellent. Very good. Now, what we've done is I've given the listeners a little bit of an introduction to you and letting them know a little bit more about your bio. But the thing is that you've been running some businesses for a few years now. Tell us a little bit more about your background.
Of course. I have run tiny businesses, and I have run one business which I scaled up to nearly 50 people at one stage, which was a challenge. And I got lots wrong because I was a very ignorant business person because I hadn't really had any training, and it was a kitchen table start, so you do it on the fly.
Yeah.
And I started in a funny way. My leadership style was probably better when I started than when I finished. I think, that's the pressure, and the more you get the feel of the fact that you don't know anything makes you a worse leader before you've even brought any other factors into it. Mm. But yeah, I did that for about 20 odd years, and then I sort of really burnt out in the end, and I lost my way anyway because I'd been providing for children with that. And so I thought, oh no, me time. I will do what I've always wanted to do since I was a child, which is write. But I still love entrepreneurship, so I wrote about entrepreneurs. And hence this fascination, among other things, that I have of watching the whole business and leadership in particular evolve over the years, which it's changed so drastically, as you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And your book that you've written is called Scale for Success. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Scale for Success I wrote because I wanted to dig back into why I got stuck or, did over a long period of time. And I also watched a lot of entrepreneurs get stuck at that particular sort of phase when you're on the way to scaling, maybe a few million turnover, but you can't quite get the whole hog. and, things start to go wrong. And so I thought, what's going on there? Why is nobody talking about this? And of course they are on podcasts now, but at the time I didn't hear a great deal about it. And I thought, I want to find out more about this. What is going on? Why does it go so wrong? And I thought, well, I'll talk to other entrepreneurs, dig around, who have gone through it and actually achieved it successfully, and find out their secrets and put it together in a book.
Nice.
So that's what I did.
Yeah.
That was my first one.
Oh, very cool. Congrats. I think that's awesome news. And I think, Scale for Success is really quite a cool title. And I think, as the listeners here are entrepreneurs who have got their own businesses, and it's a different scale as well, different size businesses. Some are multi-million-dollar businesses and some are a little bit smaller. But then we've also got leaders who are at different executive leaders from small to medium-sized businesses through to corporates as well, large corporates. And I think that a book like yours would be ideal for any of them. Actually, it's not just, I think any leader should read it as well, because it's about success and it's about probably trying times, but also about what they did and how the mindset came into it, where they were thinking about things. So I think it'd be a really, really, really cool idea for people to read it. So listeners, if you haven't already checked it out, check out the book, The Scale for Success by Jan. And I think it'd be a wonderful book for you all to read. Now, Jan, is there anything else you'd like to share about in your background as well? Anything else you'd like to share?
I think that's the sort of main point, to probably my length of service as a leader and investigating leadership and entrepreneurship in general. I got involved with a lot of entrepreneurship campaigns during my years for owning businesses. So I went off and tried to encourage people to start businesses, or if they wanted to. I mean, it's not, you must start a business. But, if they thought, oh, I'd love to do that, but I can't, tried to give them a bit of confidence and a bit of guidance and say that is an option to you. When I started out, nobody really had heard of entrepreneurship. Mm. It was almost before the time it got so popular with TV programs and things, Mm. So it was semi-educational. I worked with schools, colleges, and small business groups.
Excellent.
And indeed in the EU. So, yeah.
I think that's really cool that you're working with schools and colleges and that. Now, when you said some of them don't start because, what is it that sort of stops them? That's what I'm really wanting to know, because I think it's probably a key thing here for a lot of listeners.
I think a lot of it is mindset, actually. If we're talking books, I've got another one coming out in January called Start for Success, about starting up right. And among the entrepreneurs I talked to that one was a fascinating one from Australia, who had terrible trouble with fear. And he told me some of the story which I tell in the book about, because I think it's such a good example of getting over fear. And he had a sand, I'm trying to remember it because it's a little while since I've edited it, but he had a sand dune collapse on him as a child. And he'd got this fear. I mean, we all have those sort of fears, and or something particular, but they tend to spread out and impede your confidence, I think. And the press picked it up for some reason, and he was got hold of by Bear Grylls, of all unlikely and amazing experiences, who dragged him off to the Italian Dolomites and got him to go into caves there. But I think, that's an extreme example of trying to get over your fear, perhaps. The general principle that, fear is, which he talks about, fear just being in the mind. And there's a lovely quote that we got for the book, which is that fear is everything you want is on the other side of fear, give or take on the quote. But it's true, people have got this obstacle, this great mountain in their mind of, I'm going to fail. This is going to be terrible. And really it's not. It's no big deal. What's terrible is not starting.
That also goes down to leadership. I think that the fear of not making a decision, not starting and procrastinating.
Very much so.
Yeah, I mean, people get annoyed with a leader who doesn't, even an entrepreneur. And I think from a true entrepreneur will get frustrated with themselves for not starting. And I think that's a really important thing here. But I love what that sort of quote, everything you want is on the other side of fear. And I know that you're saying that may not be correct 100%, but I think that's a cool way of saying it as well.
The principle, yeah.
So listeners, get over your fear. Easy for Jan and I just to say it, but it's not always easy to do. And it does take work to get over the fear, but you know what? You can do it. It can happen. You can definitely get over it.
You can. Just remind yourself of how much you'd regret it if you didn't start, and then focus on where you want to get to. Put fear to one side. Just focus and go for it.
Very good. Now, Jan, you have said that you've built all businesses and that, and one of them went up to about 50 people and so forth. How did you actually get into leadership?
That was my first experience of leadership.
Wow.
And I know, no experience at all. I'd avoided really taking jobs for other people. So, I certainly hadn't climbed any career ladder or anything. So I knew absolutely zero about business, leave alone leadership. And so when we started, we were tiny. And of course, when you start those very early days, there's just a group of you and you all know what's going on and it's all great fun. And if you don't work on a Friday afternoon, you make it up on Saturday morning. And nothing much, nothing's very set in stone. And the fun factor is huge. The organisation factor is zero. So, the challenge then is when you grow, that doesn't work anymore.
Okay.
And I think the biggest challenge, and it must be even more so for people with businesses now, is how to retain that fun culture as you grow. Because without the fun and the energy, then, you haven't got very happy people. But equally, you've got to have the systems and the organisation behind it. It's a real balancing act.
I don't think anyone wants to go to work or work for a place that's just really miserable.
No.
I think having the fun, and I think the other thing you said with it was energy. Those two things is really important. I actually say to people in a lot of events I do and so forth, no one wants to work for a knuckle dragger. And people go like, what do you mean? And I go, feeling sorry for themselves, their shoulders are hunched and they've got their arms down and it's dragging along, their knuckles on the ground, and they're feeling sorry for themselves or what's going on. There's no energy there. Well, it's not a very good energy, and people, there's no fun. And I think that is those three letters, F-U-N, having fun, is huge. I think if you can have a lot of fun,
it is.
It may not be feeling like fun at times, but I think if you sit back and think about the journey that we're going through, and then it is a lot of fun. And so I love that. I think that's really, really cool. Now, here's an interesting question for you. Now, this person could be alive or from history. Who's your favorite leader and why?
Well, if we're talking, you said alive or dead or alive?
Both. Either one.
I think, when somebody says leader to me, I know he's not probably popular or anything anymore, but what Churchill did in bringing a country together and creating a community that stuck with each other through incredibly difficult times, which is, to me, a huge definition of leadership, was nothing short of incredible. So I think, for me, that he has to be in there. And another person I'd mention is a less known man, but a leader called, I've got a total blank. Was Stephen Kelly, who is, I actually talked to a lot for that first book, Scale for Success. And he was very successful, built two huge companies in Silicon Valley. He's been COO for the British government. And he now is chair of Tech Nation over here, which supports all the big tech companies. So we're talking a pretty successful guy. And he just has this quiet energy, but he's so compelling and such a visionary. And you just sit there and hang on to his every word. And I've spoken to fix up talking to him and things. I've talked to some of the people that work for him. And they're all so much in love with what they do. It clearly sprinkles through, well, not more than sprinkles, through the whole community there that, they're just excited to be there, which again is all it's all about. And you just want to please him. And he was fascinating to talk to.
I wonder what it is that he does that makes it where people just want to work there and work pretty for him. I wonder what he does. Any ideas?
I think he, I talked to him a little bit about it, and he talked about certainly being a visionary, being calm. Like you were saying, sometimes you're miserable, but, you have to put that to one side to still inspire people even when you are miserable and you're terrified and everything else that goes with running a company. But concentrate on supporting your people and enabling them to be creative and safe in innovation. And I think that's a very key point that I hear from great leaders, that if you encourage people to feel safe and that their ideas are valued, even the stupidest ones, because we all have stupid ideas and that's okay. Then you get this culture of innovation and excitement about the company's development, about ideas developing and personal development. And I think that's what people like Stephen Kelly and other great leaders are so very, very good at.
There you go. If we can build a culture of innovation and excitement, that'd be pretty cool. And I think both Winston Churchill and Stephen Kelly that you're just talking about there, both of them, I think, you talked about the word calm. And if they're calm, but, calm amongst the storm, when we're in headwinds and so forth like that, I think that's really important. Supporting the people, enable them to be creative and innovative. But I think building the culture of innovation and excitement, awesome. I think it's pretty cool. There's maybe another title for a book. There you go.
My third. Oh.
Awesome. Hey, look, the other thing I wanted to ask you was, you choose whether it's Winston Churchill or Stephen Kelly. If you were on a park bench having a cup of coffee with them, what would be one question that Jan would like to ask them?
I guess, it's with Stephen Kelly. No, I think I'll ask Winston Churchill, as to how because, yes, we're all under pressure, but pressure he was under was something else. And he suffered from depression, so which at the best of times. And yet he managed to still be an inspirational figure. How on earth do you do that? What kept him going to be able to do that, to be such an inspirational leader to other people when on his black dog days, as he used to call them?
Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes down to him not being self-conscious, but being more about country conscious and about where we're going.
I guess it probably does. You're probably right. It is, what I mentioned earlier, I think, but I'm sure you're right about putting where you're going above the fear. It's the same thing, isn't it? It's that focus on end vision that, just keeps all the horrors at bay, whichever the horrors are.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know if you've seen that on Netflix, The Crown, but I think what's quite interesting here is when we heard, when the Queen became the Queen, and what she kept being told by the Queen Mother, I think at the time was, it's the crown above everything else. It has to be the crown above everything else. And I think, maybe even Winston Churchill, and you and I weren't there, we don't know. Maybe it was the role above everything else. It's the leadership in the country and the prime ministership, what I need to do to lead this country forward. Otherwise, we might be speaking another language very soon. And so he had to really, really pull things out, which was amazing to see history, right? And how all that's played out. And
definitely. And I think the world is a poorer place for less selfless leaders.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. And I think that we don't have enough, good enough leaders nowadays. And I think for a lot of leaders, they don't know what good looks like.
I think you're absolutely right. There's far too much self-interest. And, I scribbled down the other day, article question mark, as you do, that governments don't know the meaning of the word leadership. And I think, definitely that is the case. Most governments or most politicians now don't know, the meaning of good leadership and wouldn't get people to work for more anything else,
Yeah. And I think I've got to ask,
would want to.
I wonder how many of those actual politicians around the world, whether it be, in whatever the level they are in politics and that, how many have actually run businesses or actually led teams before?
Very few, I think. And if they did, they certainly seem to have forgotten about it, and maybe one or two have whisked into a boardroom here or there, but building a small business up into a growth company, very few.
Yeah. And then there's
if any.
And then there's the other side too, right? Whereby, whether it be in a corporate world, small business, entrepreneurship, the politics side of things, sporting, the whole lot. Sometimes the title gets to their head and they forget to be the leader. And I think that's something that they need to think about.
Very good point. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, I think there's a lot of egos become involved.
Yeah, and sometimes that's not a good thing. So the show here is called Leadership is Changing. That's the title of the show. When I say that title or statement, what does that mean for Jan?
Well, during my far too long career, I've seen leadership go from being this pretty dictatorial, you're lucky to have a job, you're lucky to get paid, do as I say sort of leadership, but certainly I was employed in when I first went to work, to a very different ballgame altogether. I mean, it's absolutely unrecognizable from that. And, it's good leaders talk about only being as good as their people and coming to work to support their people and putting their people in front of a customer. And, how extreme a pendulum swing can you get? It's amazing.
It's huge. It has been a big swing, as you say, and really interesting to see where we'll go going forward. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But I think, leadership is changing is moved a lot, the needle. And I think we've gone from that dictatorship, hierarchical kind of sort of scenario to more of a collaborative kind of scenario. And a lot of organizations are struggling along that journey. And I think the other thing too would be the leaders and the way that they are with people as well, and the way that they lead is also changing. You want to say something?
Yeah, no, I was certainly going to agree about, I think people are struggling with it. I think it's very difficult for people to entirely change their style. And I think also, while it's, obviously a good thing that people are important, et cetera, but for leaders who are under the sort of pressure that, they are now with the economic state of most of the world, to try and keep a business alive and constantly be told, oh, well, you're not paying enough attention to, sort of Jane Dunn in the packing shed, is very tough. There's only so much a leader can split themselves, and not actually go under themselves. I mean, it's something I'm fairly passionate about and write a lot about, again, is leadership and mental health, or entrepreneurs' mental health, because I think it's such a tough challenge.
Yep.
And it's much, much worse than it was.
It is. And I think what we're seeing here, Jan, is that a lot of the world is getting faster and faster, whether it be entrepreneurship, business, social, data, technology. Technology is amazing nowadays in the way you can run a business as an entrepreneur versus what it was in the past. But, with all of that and life being in a fast-paced, ever-changing world, what do you reckon a leader needs to do today to be successful?
Well, I think they have to prioritize themselves a lot more in a funny sort of way. I don't mean do the politician's job but say, I'm so wonderful and important and I must pay myself all the money that's in the company. But I do mean look after themselves in a physical and mental health state, because you can't possibly be that supporter to everything and under that much pressure unless you take really, really good care. And that's quite difficult to do, because if you're not very confident, not very high self-worth, to say I matter that much that actually I've got to look after myself most of all. But of course, probably at that early stage of the company, certainly, the company won't run without you. So you really are that important. Hopefully when you grow it and it becomes an entity that runs itself, then you can, have your time off in peace and quiet. But at that early stage, it needs you. So you've got to look after yourself in an extraordinarily serious way, oddly enough.
Yeah. I think giving yourself permission to look after yourself will be a really good start, because
that's a much better way than I put it. Thank you.
No, I think the way you have put it is really good. And I think that permission is really important. And I think just overall, prioritize yourself a lot more on what you said there is key. And from, your book, from Scale for Success, or the other book you're writing as well, but just in particular because you've been talking to a lot of entrepreneurs and things and people, any ideas on what people should be doing to look after themselves more, to prioritize more?
Assuming that they've sort of fixed their mental state, that they're actually worth looking after. I think, things like we used to value over work. I think we have to recognize that actually entrepreneurs are very, very prone to doing silly things like overwork. and waking up and working at 3 a.m. and things like that. And we push it, we go on this roller coaster. We love the highs. We love fighting the lows, oddly enough, because we're really odd. And, but it's that constant challenge, exhausting, and somewhere or other it has to give. Again, there was another entrepreneur who I admire as a leader hugely in scale, called Rob Hamilton. And he actually managed to build an incredibly successful business. But he had an absolute rule that he would never, ever disturb his employees at work weekends. None of them would ever work weekends. And he only worked school term times, rather. And he was there in a supporting role, I think, the rest of the time. But he actually focused on his plans and, getting stuff done and driving the company forward in those school term times.
Yeah, that's good.
And yet he built an incredibly, sort of both in the States and here, huge company.
Yeah. So it sounds like he had boundaries. He understood what his boundaries were.
Absolutely. I think, that's the word, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Definitely.
It is. And I think that, there are a lot of the leaders I work with, they know that they should put this boundary in place. They all boundaries, but some of them are a little bit unsure what to do with it or how to possibly say no without saying no to people. It's just helping them through those techniques to understand what they need to do. But it comes back to the mindset of giving yourself that permission or understanding that it's okay to do that, which is really, really important for people. But prioritize yourself a lot more, listeners, is really, really key here, because we're needing to make sure we do look after ourselves physically and mentally, as you're saying there, Jan. It's both sides of things as well. There have been some people I've been working with one-on-one, and they've been really quite overwhelmed about what things are going on for them and so forth. And I asked them, so do you normally exercise? What do you normally do? And so some of them have gone, oh yeah, I normally go biking, or I go for a run, or I go out surfing, or I love to play tennis and things like that. Or I like doing yoga or Pilates. Okay, cool. So when was the last time you did that? Oh, 9 months ago? And I'm like, 6 months ago? And okay, so I think we need to revisit this and look at where you're wanting to go with it. And, so for some of them, they want that accountability too. So for a couple of them in particular of late, I actually got them they like running. So they said, I haven't been out for a run. And I said, okay, cool. So they said to me they would go for a run over the next 3 days just to get underway with things again. Okay, cool. I want you to send me a photo of the view that you've got out on the run and text it to me.
That's great.
And they've done it. And it's been really cool to see them. And then when I get back to them 2 weeks later, just for their one-on-one session, I go, so how's it gone for you? What have you done? I've been for a run. For some of them, it's been 3 or 4 times a week. Others, it's been every day. How do you feel now? And you can actually hear it in their language. You can hear it in the way that they're breathing, everything. They have got, there's been this shift because they've been getting the stress out of them because of this activity that they've done. They've got fresh air, the blood's flowing and things like that. More importantly, they've got out from the desk. They've gone out and did something else. And I think that is really key. So there we go, listeners. As Jan was saying, prioritize yourself a lot more, which is really, really important. Jan, you and I have been talking about leadership. We've been talking about leaders, entrepreneurs. Let's change lens or gears and let's look at it now from an employee's expectation. What do you think? What are your thoughts around this, around how has employees' expectations of leaders changed?
I think they've changed again tremendously. Croaky, hold on 1 second. Take a sip of my juice. Again, back in those dictatorial days, we all were told, well, if you're really lucky, you'll get a job for life, and, oh, wow, gosh, what luck, and we have moved again a little bit from that. People are right off that idea, it's unusual. Some companies do encourage, of course, a 10-year tenure, but they might give 6 months off as a sort of reward or a career break at that point, if somebody actually reaches that time at least. But on the whole, the majority of employees actually are looking for experiences. They're looking for development. They're looking for their own career path and the companies to listen to what they want and how they want to develop it, and the company to actually fit that round. So if they have a passion to go and do more work with people, they want to be sure the company's going to support them and somehow weave that in. and then they'll be happy, and then they'll give that sort of loyalty. Otherwise, they'll move on.
They will. They will indeed. Do you know, I had this experience. It's still today, I'm speechless with it. It blew me away. I had this very senior VP sit down with me in Hewlett-Packard days when I was actually in the States doing an event. And he said to me, "Tell me more about you, Dennis," because he was newly promoted new into the role. And I said to him, explain about myself, and he goes, "Where do you want to be in 5 years' time?" And I'm like, "Well, this is what I actually want to do." And he said to me, "Cool. Then our role here in HP is to help you do that." And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, we're here to help."
Never heard of that before.
But then when I think about Bill and Dave, Hewlett and Packard, and think about those two guys, that's what they've done in Silicon Valley over the years, right? And Stephen Kelly, as you talked about, that's what it's all been about. It's about entrepreneurship, and it's about leadership, and it's about helping people go and be successful in business and do what they want to do to follow their purpose, their passion, which has been very, very cool to see. So if if organizations can help employees think about what their purpose is and where they want to go and help them do that as well, while also helping them run their businesses, what a great equation.
Absolutely. It's a perfect recipe, isn't it?
Nice way of putting it. Perfect recipe. Very good. Now, we talked about possibly what leadership might be in the future. And so here's the question for you. If I was to get you to get your crystal ball out now and start thinking about the future, where do you see leadership being in 5 years?
Well, I think, it's generally getting more sort of concerned with sharing and being on an equal footing with the rest of a team. More communal, if you like. But I worry slightly as to how that's going to go, as to how anybody can maintain the balance. If you go too far and you've still got a founder who takes all the risks financially and everything else, and yet they're expected to give away as much everything else to everybody else, I don't know how that's quite going to work. And that's where I worry sometimes that it's getting a little bit too unrealistic. But, we work things out in amazing ways and innovate and bash things out. So we might see all sorts of changes.
Yeah, we will see change no matter what. There's going to be change happening. We just don't know what it's going to look like clearly yet. I think on the other side too is I interviewed a gentleman probably a couple 100 episodes back. Oh, that's a nice way. It's nice to say that. But he talked about that he thinks that the future is going to be very much that subscription type kind of workforce, whereby we will buy some people's time or expertise and skill set to come in, do a project, an initiative and things like that. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs probably work that way as well. Like I do too, right? My design team, my production team, and things like that. I'm actually on a subscription basis buying in their business, these skills to come and help me. And I think that could be possibly another way that a lot of business may go forward.
I think that makes a lot of sense because then, you still retain a reason for the risk, to be honest. And I know it works really well. I don't employ many people writing wise, but for example, I've got a young guy, again, subscription wise, who's doing some social media stuff for me at the moment. And he's absolutely lovely. He's fairly new. But he's so great to work with. He's excited about what he's doing, and says, "This is great. This is so cool. I'm learning." And I'm just that alone energizes me. And I think this is so great to work with him. This is such fun. This is why I get up in the morning, so you can still get all the good stuff without some of the bad stuff, if you like,
Well, I think
So I think he may well be right.
But I think it's also what you just said there too, is he's excited about what he's doing. In other words, he's probably working on his passion, his purpose. It's the stuff that he loves to do. It's where I think a lot of people who are miserable because they're not actually, or they're not very happy, or they're just not in their flow because things aren't happening because they're probably not doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Or they're not being given the opportunity to fly. I think sometimes we have leaders who maybe what I call diminishes. They hold people down and things like that, where they should get out of the way and let people fly. And, they might be surprised to see what people can do.
I think that's their own inadequacy usually, isn't it? They're afraid of those people flying. They might be rather better.
Yep, absolutely. Oh, there you go. Absolutely. Jan, hey, it's been a real pleasure having you on this episode today. If our listeners are wanting to get hold of you, where do they go?
They would be very, very welcome to come to my website, which is Cavelle, And it's .co.uk, so very easy to remember.
Cool. We'll have the
jancavelle.co.uk.
Yeah, cool. And we're going to put those in the show notes as well. So
Lovely.
Very good. So once again, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Awesome. There you go, listeners. Well, what a wonderful episode that's been about scale for success and helping yourself be really good and going out there and building a culture of innovation and excitement. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.